Good evening, dear friends. On the behalf of Indian Society of Critical Care Medicine, I welcome you all to this ninth webinar in the series of Contain COVID. Today's webinar is quite different from the different webinars because it is pertaining to a very specialized area of the management of COVID, that is ECMO and the lung transplantation. In second wave, we have heard a lot about the lung transplantation and the ECMO. And in Delhi, the scene is now people are asking whether do you have a ECMO bed available in hospital or not. So I don't want to waste much time. I would request our General Secretary, Dr. Arindam Kar, who is the moderator today, to please introduce the faculty and start the session. Over to you, Dr. Kar.
Thank you, sir. Doctor, it was been kind. Our ISCCM President, Dr. Deepak Govil, introduced and initiated the program. And I would straight away come and introduce our esteemed panel of faculties. So I will start with the lady, the gorgeous lady, Dr. Poonam Malhotra, who is the professor of Department of Cardiac Anesthesiology and Cardiothoracic Center, AIMS, New Delhi. Also the past president of IACTA and ECMO Society of India. Welcome, madam. Yeah. Thank you, ma'am. Then we have the other lady as Dr. Jumana Yusuf Haji, who is my colleague in Sir HN Reliance Hospital in Mumbai and very adeptly trained in ECMO in Singapore, and she is handling our ECMO department. Along with we have the very famous cardiothoracic surgeon or cardiac surgeon, who is the director of Department of Advanced Cardiac Surgeons and Cardiac Transplant, Dr. Anvay Mule, who is also my senior colleague in Sir HN Reliance Hospital. Dr. Mule, sir. Yeah, I think he is somewhere here. Then I do have my former colleagues, my friends, my brothers, both of them who are doing a wonderful job in ECMO in India. If I'm presume that they are running almost close to 25 beds in the city of Kolkata, which is presumably one of the highest in entire Southeast Asia, Dr. Deepanjan Chatterjee and Dr. Arpan Chakraborty. Both of them are here. Arpan, you are not visible. Yeah, Arpan will join us, and they are both senior consultant in Department of Cardiothoracic Cardiac Thoracic Anesthesia and ECMO, as well as critical care. So they are all in all, the entire Eastern India people are putting their hope on Deepanjan and Arpan doing a wonderful job, parallelly running almost 20 to 25 beds of ECMO. Then we have Dr. T. Sundar, who has joined us. As sir was telling that he might be late, but he came in just in time. He is the director of lung transplantation in Apollo Hospital, Chennai. Thank you, sir, for joining in a short notice and also be in time. Then we have Dr. Ramesh Paul. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Dr. Ramesh Paul is the senior consultant cardiothoracic surgery, heart and lung transplant in Apollo Hospital, Chennai. And Dr. Sundar and Dr. Ramesh are working together in Apollo, Chennai. We have Dr. Vijil Rahulan. Dr. Rahulan, yeah, he is the additional director and chief of transplant pulmonology in KIMS Heart and Lung Transplant Institute, Secunderabad. They're doing a lot of it. We have very dynamic person, Dr. Rian Shetty, who is a consultant pediatric cardiac intensive therapy unit and head of extracorporeal life support and Narayana Health City in Bangalore. Dr. Rian Shetty, he's here. And obviously, the ECMO discussion cannot happen without Dr. Rahul Pandit, who is the Director of Critical Care Fortis Hospitals, Mumbai, and member of the National Task Force appointed by the Honorable Supreme Court. I hope he would be joining sometime. Dr. Pandit is somewhere there, but he would be coming. Okay, so we already have more than close to around 350 participants joining on the Zoom and more than 1,000 already on the Facebook Live. And I'm sure we will have a lot of questions from the participants as well as from me to all the panelists. So it would be an open session, and please feel free, just raise your hand so that I can come back to you and ask questions. But please feel free to intersect and give your views on that. So we all know that ECMO has come back in a very big way. So the first resurgence happened after the the SARS that came in India in 2008 and 9, when we started in Delhi, in Pune, in Mumbai, in Chennai, in Hyderabad. But this time in COVID, particularly in the second wave, the need of ECMO has come up like anything. And now even people are completely, even lay people are completely aware of the need of ECMO, but may not be fully aware of the nuances of ECMO. So maybe we can come up with a very clear directives and answers on this after this webinar itself. So I will start with Arpan and Dipanjan, as they're doing such number of cases, as well as also come to Poonam madam, that what is the situation, what is the present availability of ECMO in Indian situation. We are a country of 1.35 billion. So what do you think? Are there enough centers, manpower, trained people, equipments and disposables? What are the actual situation right now? Arpan, Dipanjan, you can both start, then I will go to Poonam madam.
Dr. Dipanjan, you're mute.
Dipanjan, unmute yourself. I would have a very quick. I think we are not being able to connect. Can I
Dr.
ask?
Arindam, if I may, I had done a survey in 2018. In 2019, I had done a survey pan-India, and I have some results. If you would allow me to share my screen, I would like to just show exactly the answer to your question.
Yes, you can share your screen. Yep.
So this is the concentration of the ECMO centers across India, mostly limited to the metros. There are around 3. Can you hear me? Yeah. There are around 3 in Mumbai. There are around 4 to 5 in Bangalore, and in Delhi around 3 to 4. Sporadic in Gujarat and Kolkata. Of course, we have Medica, and then some in Delhi and NCR. So these are the also
Hyderabad is also doing pretty well.
Yes, yes. So these are the few ones which are also registered. That's just the data that I have collected. I had done a survey which had around 349 participants pan-India, and the number of experience centers in that was less than 30% of the 349, of which the number of people who were actually retrieving on ECMO was very few across India. So as you can see the numbers, this is the green shows none, and around 13% were doing ECMO and retrieving were doing ECMO in their centers, while only a very small sliver were retrieving on ECMO. So this was the condition in 2019, just before 2018, just before the 19, in fact, just before the pandemic struck us. And most of the people thought that hurdles for an ECMO program at their institute was lack of training, lack of a team, lack of cannulation expertise. I think cannulation expertise, no ECMO equipment, and lack of awareness within the patient population. These were almost similar, 30% were the reasons, but mostly it was lack of affordability. What we are seeing in the pandemic is the opposite. People who are approaching already understand the cost, already understand the logistics, but they are just seeking out ECMO in desperation, not understanding that the other factors are very important when a team is when you are approaching a team for ECMO or for transplant. So basically, training, teamwork, skills, and awareness amongst the patients and referral physicians. So every physician who is looking at a CT saying, oh, this is a completely white out lung and needs to go for transplant, and then people are scrambling for an ECMO center. And of course, there are a lot of centers which have initiated ECMO during this pandemic, but they don't have the entire infrastructure present, like easy, even if they have a CT scan, whether they can really go with the ECMO to the CT scan, or they have, or whether they have a blood.
So optimum infrastructure had been definitely lacking in terms of both
Exactly,
physical
because a lot of
infrastructure and
centers
training
have
itself.
initiated ECMO and are now realizing the long runs.
Hmm.
So this is what I had gathered as data for a different
So
reason.
very quickly on the other panelists, please do comment on the survey and the data, the resurgence, whether it had been good, whether it had been.
Yes. So now what Jumana said was 2019, and the question was pertaining to today's availability of the ECMO and the need of the ECMO and the infrastructure which is raised. So when we asked for this is a quick question to the Delhi guys. When I asked for a ECMO machine, new machine, and the answer from the most of the companies was that there are private people in Delhi who had ordered the ECMO machine, and they have got orders of 36 to 39 ECMO machines, out of which 15 are going to the private people. So if they fell sick, they will take their own ventilator, they will take their own ECMO and go to the center and tell them to put it on. This is India. This is India.
This is incredible. This is incredible India, sir.
This is what the company. This is what the company people have told me.
No, I'll tell you the Delhi situation. There are only 5 machines which are on rent. Dr. Jumana, can you stop sharing your screen?
Yes.
So there are almost 4 or 5 machines in Delhi which are rotating between different hospitals. Incidentally, I am using 3 of them. So there are hardly 5 machines which are rotating in North India, not only in Delhi, the NCR, and 1 or 2 machine is rotating in Jaipur.
Okay.
Can I come in? Can I come
yes,
in?
Poonam madam, yes.
In 2014-15, we were 9 centers. In 2018-19, we were 29 centers. And today we are 104 centers in 2021 post-COVID. Now, if you say centers with 1 machine, yes, that is a center. Jaipur, 1 small hospital, or any city, even Mathura, if they borrow a machine from the company for 1 particular patient who may be a VIP of that local area, and the patient recovers or dies, does not matter, but by hook or by crook, that center becomes an ECMO centers. But as Jumana rightly pointed out, we have the ELSO centers, and India was one of the first ones to recognize the Southwest ELSO chapter of ELSO under Dr. Robert Bartlett. We have 9 such chapters. India belongs to the Southwest Asian chapter of ELSO. We are all members there. We have a dedicated team, but SWAC ELSO members, we are just 7 from the country. There are countries like Saudi Arabia and Kuwait who have equal number of, being a smaller country than India, have more than 5 centers. The reason being the non-awareness, number 1. Number 2, are we using ECMO in the right patient? Is it for a compassionate use to save the patient, or is it for a commercial use? Or is it because in this pandemic, especially the second wave, everyone thinks that we can put an ECMO, and ECMO is available by the company. Now, whether there are 3 companies manufacturing or 1 company which says that I have, as Dr. Mulle said, I have 50 machines and I have 58 orders, which 8 to refuse. So the machines are there, but there is a paucity of machines which even the global chapters would give to a SWAC ELSO chapter with less registered number of candidates vis-a-vis other countries. So in an era of resource limitations, are we justified in using ECMO? Because the end of the phase 1, ELSO guidelines said ECMO to be put in judiciously.
Now, I will come to that, madam. That I will come to the indications.
As of today, there are 128 machines being used of the Mecca company. I'm naming the company because I got the survey from them before I joined here today. And they are in use all over India in more than 104 centers. In AIMS, if I can say, since 2002, we have 9 machines, 5 of which are working. Only 1 of them is a Mecca machine, which is for veno-venous ECMO. The rest are all for VA ECMO. And we use the Biomedicus and the Medtronic pumps. It's all indigenized, worked up by the companies for us. We don't use Mecca. So we are using them, but in COVID, our use is minimal.
So 128 in 104 centers. But if you say that regular centers is not more than 10 to 15, as I say. Okay, very quickly, Arpan, you are online. Your experience on the resource availability. Then I will come to Dr. Pandit, Dr. Sundar.
Resource availability, I think the other way around. The resource should be used when there is a pandemic, because the ECMO actually came out of a pandemic. ECMO in acute respiratory failure, adult acute respiratory failure, has came out of that H1N1 pandemic, and it was actually ECMO was behind the operation theater, under the scope of the cardiac surgeons before that H1N1 things. So it has actually came out of a pandemic. And if I say it should not be used in a resource intensive atmosphere, or it's a too much of money taking things, but for whom I am talking, the patient, if they come with a 40%, 60% saturation, and he has 1% chance of leaving of that night, he can take that opportunity out. I am telling you, the ECMO should be judged not at the survival first. It has to be judged at that level of lack of oxygenation. If you see somebody is dying because of only hypoxia at that night, and if you have ECMO machine, you are not thinking that it's a pandemic, I should not waste my time on giving on ECMO. This is absolutely unjustified, because there is no law, there is nothing is there. If you can use the HFNC, well, then what is the point of using this HFNC?
Okay, we'll come to that. It's quite an I think we have opened up a controversy on that part, but we'll come to that.
I didn't mean Arpan, the way you took it. I meant it from the guidelines point of view, because it is also being misused. I can quote many examples. I don't wish to. It's too small a time. But you should use it resourcefully, and I didn't say it should not be used.
I will come to our friends from Apollo Chennai, Dr. Sundar sir, and Dr. Ramesh Paul. Your experience on ECMO, then I'll come back to Dr. Pandit itself. Dr. Sundar and Dr. Ramesh, very quickly.
Yeah. Hi. Just to say, I agree with Dr. Malhotra. It is both used as well as abused. Just like transplantation, ECMO in COVID or in ARDS has a very narrow window. So you can go with it too early, or you end up going too late. So there are very objective criteria that came from the H1N1 epidemic with the Murray score, not just a single Murray score, but a Murray score that tracks from 3 upwards. In a patient who has had other forms of ventilation. Now, this is where the problem rises, because these patients are supposed to be ventilated with a reasonable level of pressure support, with lowish plateau pressures, who have been prone, who have nitric oxide, and who have then demonstrated that the PO2, or as Arpan said, the oxygenation is not there, or a pH that comes below 7.25 with a rising PCO2. So these are very, very clear-cut guidelines. The problem is when you have patients asking for ECMO from these peripheral centers that don't have nitric oxide, are not happy to prone their patients, who sometimes are just on NIV, and an ECMO team or a retrieval team has gone there. It then falls on the retrieval team to do all of these things. But they are there just to put in the ECMO. So you then get a mix of patients, some of whom have fit in the criteria or indications for ECMO, and some who have just come off a HFNC onto an ECMO. And therefore, it's very difficult to judge survival in these very non-homogeneous groups.
Okay, so
our own experience has again been the same. We've got people from all different kinds of streams.
So taking clue from your statement, I'm asking a very direct question to Dr. Rahul Pandit, who is also one of the pioneers in doing ECMO in India. That is it time to have a new set of indications for ECMO in COVID?
Yes, absolutely. I think the first question which one needs to answer about ECMO is ECMO to what? And if that answer is absolutely clear, I think then there is no doubt what Arpan said or what Dr. Malhotra said. Because then you can actually justify if you have a very clear answer at the end of that. If you don't have an answer at the end of it, if you feel that this patient is already too early or too late, then you need to be honest to yourself and then actually say that, look, I don't think the benefits are good. And if you're going to do ECMO at that time, then you're actually not equitable. Then the question of equitability comes across, because you're actually offering it to people who just have money, and that's why it's been offered. But whereas when you take the money out of that and you just look at the context in which it is, then I think it's very easy. So yes, new set of guidelines. Yes, absolutely clear. Anvay, you wanted to say something.
So what are the guidelines, or what are the indications that I'm too early or too late in a given patient?
Can I interrupt you?
Every patient is different. Now today I have got 2 patients. Listen, today I have got 2 patients on ECMO. One has got severe consolidated pneumonia and fibrosis, and another gets severe emphysematous bullae. Two extremes of the lung pathology. Extremes of the lung pathology. The one patient with eczematous bullae does not require an ECMO or did not require an ECMO, but for a transport and continuous leak and causing subcutaneous emphysema and mediastinum, which has settled down with the decreasing the ventilator support. And then we can transport him here. My point is that the other patient who is a consolidated and we had crashed, we had to put on an ECMO. And then when you say that whether it is decision, is a bridge to decision making, yes, bridge to the decision making, whether it's going to be good or not for a transplant, bridge to the transplant and bridge to the recovery. There are three things for which we put the ECMO on. And the decision making is such ambiguous situation in difficult situations, I feel.
I agree.
Dr. Rahul, Dr. Rahul Vijan, I think he wants to, yeah, please. Then I will come to you.
We started, we are one of the largest lung transplant program in the country, and we started using ECMO very early. And when COVID started, as previous panelists mentioned, the lot of centers started using it. Some did not know how to run the ECMO. They started using it, but the outcomes were very poor. But if you are confronted with a patient who is not maintaining oxygenation, carbon dioxide is going high, I would suggest that if an ECMO is available, you instill the ECMO so that you can have a decision. Decision can be whether a decision to recovery or bridge to a transplant. In our center, we do offer transplant, but however, because of the pandemic, the donations are low. However, right now, the focus is only on recovery. And most of these patients, if they manage well, at least 30 to 40% will recover. If you give enough time, if you control the sepsis, which is a Herculean task on a long run ECMO run, after 3 to 4 weeks, we have seen patients who recover. So there are a lot of controversies about institution of ECMO. However, if you look at the patient in front of you, and you remove the VIPism and other things, you can't let a patient sit on a ventilator on prone position, completely paralyzed, PCO2 going high, it may not survive that night. Then if you are available ECMO, I would always recommend to put on ECMO and then
you have some time to take a decision. Exactly. Yes. Anyone wants to comment anything?
So I would like to. Yeah.
Yes,
Joanna. I would like to add to what Dr. Muley said about the two patients that we have. The first one, we have installed ECMO on the day she was intubated. And she had been on NIV only for 5 days prior to that. She was intubated, could not be ventilated in prone. Luckily, she was in a nearby hospital. We went and we retrieved. So it wasn't a late window. She's today on day 43 of ECMO. She is sitting out of bed, eating. She's able to even run her business remotely. But the lungs have shown no sign of opening up. She's listed. The family is extremely aware. They know exactly how many donations are happening pan-India. So the problems the things that were not allowing ECMO to grow initially, that is lack of awareness amongst relatives.
So those things we have circumvented. I think we have come up with that.
Away, and yes, now demand. So again, the husband on the first night when we were counseling, he was very clear. Is she going to make it through the night if you refuse? And I think almost every party in
that's a very, very important question.
Everybody was actually alerted. So if we hadn't, somebody would have put her on ECMO because the relative was very clear and he still is.
So again, an open question to everyone. So I will pick up the clue from Dr. Pandit is that the timing, what would be the ideal timing? Should we initiate it early or should we initiate late? And my question to all the panelists is which of subsets of patients are giving a better outcome, whether when you have initiated early or when you have initiated in the second or third week?
So a lot of
Dr. Sundar, madam, Dr. Sundar wants to. He raised the hand. Dr. Sundar, please.
Unmute.
Dr. Sundar,
you need to unmute.
Unmute, Sundar. Sundar, unmute yourself. Unmute yourself.
I have.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. There are plenty of friends the panel. Hi, everybody.
Yes, sir.
Yes, you would like to identify people. We go through the usual indications. People do go for a proning, watch out for hypoxia, hypercarbia, and watch out for baroprotective ventilation. But you need to make sure that you don't send patients or put ECMO too late. You try ideally within a week of ventilation if it doesn't come along. And then as long as there is only a single organ dysfunction, if the patient has already got multi-organ and on sepsis with positive blood cultures, the outcomes of ECMO even to recovery is pretty low. And in a time of acute resource scarcity, one has to do a little bit of rationing. When there is no comorbidities, patients are less than 50, single organ, reduced periods of ventilation. We in our unit, we've got about 10 ECMO machines running simultaneously. We are extubated 4 of them, 2 of them mobilized, and we hope at least about 40 of them would be going towards recovery. So that would be the rough indication.
Okay. Poonam, madam?
Yeah, I totally agree with what Dr. Sundar said. Most of the studies and our own criteria is, why did we stop doing COVID ECMO in March when we took a decision? Our patients come in very late. We prone them, we mechanically ventilate them. There's no dearth of NRBMs or HFNCs in our center, or even the machines or the ventilators. But what is wrong is the timing of ECMO. We were putting it beyond 10 days. On the 11-12 days, when the PaFiO2 ratios remained more than 150, whatever criteria which were to be met for putting and cutting off that time of intubation to ECMO, the guidelines came in by April this year, most of the guidelines, and this is when we decided that 10, 12, 14, 15 day is no time to put in an ECMO. You will have an intracranial hemorrhage. And most of the other problems that we face with that of anticoagulation will come back later. But timing is very, very important. As Jumana said in her first patient, you intubate the patient and you put in an ECMO, your patient will do well. The only other thing is how well the...
Do all our panelists do agree that early is a much better chance?
I sincerely feel that in COVID, you need to actually look at the onset of symptoms as the first day.
Yes.
And you need to take up the time from there on, not when the patient got admitted or when the RT-PCR came positive. That's one.
So day of illness is more important, right?
Day of illness is important. The second is, when you're counting the ventilation days, you need to take into account the non-invasive ventilation strategy as well, whatever could be used. If they have used HFNC or BiPAP, that's a ventilated day for the patient. So please remember, if they have been on 20 days of BiPAP and then intubated, and we say that they are now one day, it's not. It's 21 days of intubation, 21 days of non-invasive ventilation as well. So we need to understand that.
Dipanjan, you want to add something?
Number of days of respiratory failure. That can
correct. Yes, very much. I think Dr. Riyan Shetty is also on the same page as Dr. Malhotra and this. Maybe you should get him in to see.
Please.
So to summarize, I think you guys have said everything. So I'll just summarize. So days of illness, we take RT-PCR positive when he was RT-PCR positive because it's very difficult to find out exactly the days of symptoms. Then we take the number of days of ventilation, which we add the non-invasive number of days. Young patient, like Dr. Sundar said, less than 50, no comorbidities, hopefully a single organ as much as possible. And then last thing is finance. Do you think that these patients will understand and will be happy to finance the patient? Whether they have or not is one more thing, but also happy to spend that much of money. So that's one thing. And the last thing we look at is whether this ECMO is going to affect outcomes of our post-cardiac surgical patients. So we don't want to keep all our resources there, because we need a couple of ECMOs at least in the cardiac unit to save some children or adults who just need 4 or 5 days of ECMO. This is what we have followed so far.
Dr. Mole.
Hi. I just want to know, and I think the visual is the better person who can guide us about it. How does the ECMO helps in COVID lung? It isn't cure.
So to frame the question,
as a cardiac surgeon, my understanding of ECMO is a heart-lung machine without a reservoir, and the membrane oxygenator can work for, instead of 4 to 6 hours, it works for 4 to 6 weeks. That is understanding of my understanding of ECMO. So it gives rest to the lung. It gives rest to the lung and avoid the mechanical trauma of ventilation on the lungs. So the recovery is by healing, or if it doesn't heal, then by lung transplant is a different scenario. So ECMO timing is to avoid hypoxia of other organs, is to avoid the hypoxia and damage of other organs and keep one organ failure. That is my understanding of it. So earlier you put the chance of second organ failure is much less. So when I put the patient on the heart-lung machine as a cardiac surgeon, and Sundar will agree with me, and is that it allows me to work on heart and lung.
So Dr. Vijil Rahulan, the very straightforward question that whether putting on an ECMO increases the chance of lung to resurge back, to come back on that part. And in that frame, why not we put it early and take an early decision so that we can avoid hypoxic injury or the tissue injury to the other organs and preserve those organs and reduce the complications.
So that depends on a particular patient. You can't generalize that. Some patients will have high peak airway pressure. You are not able to ventilate the moment you are intubating the patient. Such patients, you definitely need to think about ECMO much early. You don't need to wait so long for and see many days. So, but most of the, in general, if you see, you have to institute ECMO early. That doesn't mean all intubated patients need ECMO. But if the carbon dioxide is going up, if the peak airway pressure is going up, if that lung is taking a hit, then better to rest the lung, put down ECMO. So that is, just the level of oxygenation alone is not enough. You have to look at the lung injury that's happening. How is how poor is his compliance? How are the airway pressure? So you need to institute ECMO early. But in some patients where a better compliance is there, you can wait. But definitely before any second organ failure, you have to do it. And obviously, sepsis. So if there is.
And what would be again, a question to all the panelists, that after how many days do you think that you have given enough time for the lung to recover? When you start feeling, okay, we should be, what is the criteria? It is the days, or you go back to the ventilation criteria or PF ratios, or what? Okay, Deepanjan,
one bit before
I think
that,
the transplant
Dr.
centers, if you can help us with that.
Sorry, Dr. Ramesh.
Yeah, so just to, this is from where Dr. Vigilant said, is obviously one size doesn't fit all. He's absolutely right. But there are, at least in terms of the indication of going in, which you've been discussing, there are two investigations which are underutilized. Now, this cannot really be done everywhere, but wherever you can do it, an echocardiogram, which is well done, as well as a CT scan quite close to the time of ventilation or just after ventilation, there are certain things which you can use to prognosticate. If you can see ground glasses and air bronchograms still suggesting there's inflammation or infection, those patients can recover, as Vigilant said, up to even 30 days and 40 days. The average wait on ECMO is about 18 to 21 days. This is world over before you can see any signs of recovery. On the other hand, on the CT, if you're seeing traction bronchiectasis, fibrosis, cystic spaces, honeycombing, then those patients, if it's quite extensive, and by extensive I mean if it is there in certainly more than 70% of the lung, which predominantly in the lower lobes and very little air only in the upper lobes, these patients are very unlikely to be as a bridge to recovery. So this is where your indication bit comes in. Secondly, if you use the echocardiogram, you can visualize it to see if the RV is stretched and the LV is underfilled. Quite a few of these patients have a concomitant pulmonary embolism. And so this means that the problem is, even if you improve the hypoxemia, blood is very to the left side. However, you're not going to not do the ECMO because of that, because the heparin may take care of it. The use of nitric oxide, and when you put them on ECMO, the kind of improvement of RV function and the improvement of LV filling is a very good sign at the bedside when you know that these patients are actually going to benefit from ECMO. I just wanted to add it to the indications.
Brilliant, sir. Brilliant. And anything, Orpon, you want to add?
Just add on comment to sir. These GGOs are not disappearing even on months. So
that is right.
And
the radiological evidence.
and we are not getting that much of fibrosis even after 2 to 3 months. When they are going back, all the GGOs are getting dissolved and they are taking for 6 months. So ideas of prolonged ECMO has to be revisited. In H1N1 we used to tell more than 14 days, it's known as prolonged ECMO. Now I'm telling more than 28 days it is prolonged ECMO. So it has to be revisited also, because it will help in prognostication and the time limitation when you are giving the indications for ECMO to the initial taking consent for the patients. That is most important part. Second thing is, looking at the RV and looking at the LV is fine. I don't have any problem, but RV sometimes kept dilated throughout your ECMO run, and that is worrisome. That is worrisome. And these patients also has improved after 42 days, 37 days they came out of ECMO. So COVID is a new learning for us. It is not giving the idea of this idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis on ECMO, how they are doing when you are putting them for the transplant. It is, and the term vanishing fibrosis, how many of us has seen a fibrotic changes in all patients? It is not. It is the GGOs which are getting dissolved over a period of time, maybe 6 months, and leaving behind few fraction bronchiectasis at the lower basis.
So just to put some data,
Dr. Pandit wanted to say
on
something.
that, is that on the SUPADI trial, or the international registry data, it was very clear that the mortality benefit extended. I mean, their cutoff was 90 days. So you're really talking mortality at 3 months, not at 14 days, not at 1 month.
Yes, sir. Yes,
it is just that the median stay on the ECMO was about 3 weeks. Now we are actually seeing, we had a patient who had essentially stone-like lungs for the last 31, 32 days. But for the last 2 or 3 days, he's actually beginning to improve. So this has implications for this bridge to transplant. I have a feeling that in a lot of units that do 1 or 2 transplants, they're actually too premature in putting patients onto the lung transplant list. This has implications for people who are waiting with other non-COVID diseases, who may lose their turn because of the supra-urgent status that is functional in some states. It's not functional in Tamil Nadu, so it's not a problem here. But so it has implications, what Dr. Arpan is saying, that if you're going to say only 14 days, 28 days, and then fall it off, it's not right. I think long ECMOs have also shown a mortality benefit. Maybe it's not as big as the ones who got better in 14 days, but even in that the cohort of people who had ECMO runs beyond 4 weeks, 8 weeks, also there was improvement in a 14% of patients. So that's the number.
That is my idea, sir. That's what
Dr. Pandit. So should we have when should we actually take a call that this patient is not going to improve and we need to think of something else? Dr. Pandit.
So on ECMO, you mean? On ECMO?
Yes, on ECMO, yeah.
Look, I think that's a very difficult question. I completely agree with what everybody just said about it, what Dr. Paul said and what Dr. Arpan said. Once you put on ECMO, you should be committed. You should not be then stepping back and looking that I'm going to basically not wait for the recovery to happen, or I'm going to start thinking of transplant. I would talk with the family about transplant quite early on, because that's one of the possible outcomes. But I would say that, look, realistically, I think we need to wait and see. In Maharashtra right now, it's easy because we haven't had a donation since March 5th. So it is essentially wait and see how the recovery goes, and we put them on a transplant list. So that's
Tell me about it.
So it's easy right now. But I will just give one analogy. Give me 30 seconds to explain. If I break my leg, I keep a driver to drive my car. But if I don't keep a driver and keep on driving my car and then keep a driver after 20 days, my leg is not going to heal very quickly. So that's the answer. If you think that these lungs are not oxygenating well, ventilating well, that means CO2 is not clear, you put them on ECMO and then wait for it to recover. It will probably recover. But if you do it at 20 days, it's hard, Dr. Arindam, to actually justify anything. That's where the problem occurs. Then they actually have to be bridged to a transplant. 10% of them will recover. That's okay. That's fine.
I have an infographic, Dr. Arindam, for this exact scenario, whatever we have. So if you can let me share my screen once again.
Yeah.
I'll just quickly run through that.
Now the question is, while you were putting it on the screen, Dr. Pandit sir, is that people are thinking that maybe it would recover without a requirement of ECMO. So that's why they come late. They're thinking that we might recover without it. So you cannot blame people out of that,
No,
desperate thing.
I'm not blaming, but if you look at the statistics which I have in my unit, we've looked after 1300 ICU patients almost. Of my own patients, I put 2 on ECMO. Rest all of the ECMOs have been retrieved from outside. So there is something which I'm talking about, timely intubation also. So the pre-care which one get before that is also very important. And we are getting calls. I'm sure all of you are getting calls of patients on 20 days of BiPAP and to be put on ECMO, but intubation is missed in between somewhere.
So I would request that when the task force recommendation comes from the same panel, they should have a very clear-cut indication as well as the timing, that is time to ECMO. So time to intubate like that, the time to ECMO when you initiate. So we will have a very clear answer. The entire India will have a clear answer to it. Yes, Dr. Jumana.
So basically, India is in its second surge and the awareness regarding ECMO has increased. So initially, in the first phase, we were getting calls for ECMO for patients who have been stuck on ventilator for a long time. And then it was assumed that it is fibrosis. And then we were, getting patients for transplant. This was, I'm talking about first phase. In the second phase, COVID care ICU treatments have become much better because everybody has an algorithm and they're doing their best possible, even proning early or managing on timing the intubation right. But once conventional methods do not work, we get a call for ECMO. Then in that case, we need to shift to an ECMO center on ECMO. Or if you feel that the lung is very advanced based on his ventilator and radiological findings, then shift to an ECMO transplant center. Here I will add that there are certain centers, because of the surge, had decided not to put on ECMO. But when their patients became more and more chronic, they actually offered ECMO after consulting a transplant team and sort of talk to the family, the two teams talk to the family at the same time that, yes, we will initiate ECMO, we will manage till you are, shifted to a transplant center. This panel over here shows our classical ELSO indications for ECMO, which is time since intubation, PF ratio, and Murray score. These are the only 3 things that matter. It should be within 7 days of intubation, PF ratio less than 150 on FiO2 more than 90, and Murray score or unable to be in ventilator more than 7 days as bridge to recovery if unable to prone or unstable. So I think Dr. Arpan has put a lot of patients on early ECMO when they were obese, and I think they got good results because of that window. Those obese patients would not have been able to prone. That's the data I got from him. ECMO to transport safely to better equipped centers. This we are getting a lot in this surge because a lot of tier 2 cities have been badly hit, and we're getting calls from Patna, Bhopal, Chandigarh, all over the country, where they just want the patient who's still on NIV with a PF ratio of less than 100 to be shifted to a center where they can get good medical care. They need not be ECMO, and this is where we are stuck. We are refusing for this indication as of now because it becomes difficult to offer some. But of course, again, they've been on NIV with high PF ratio, low PF ratio, so it's something to consider. And ECMO as bridge to transplant, of course. This is just a Murray score I've put here. And basically, when I look at a patient and I see progressive respiratory failure suggested by SaO2 less than 88 with a pH of less than 7.2 due to hypercapnia, where you have already exhausted conventional ventilation with high settings, failed trial of prone ventilation, high PEEP, and hemodynamic failure is what you're worrying about now as risk to mortality, basically because of high ventilator settings. He's an ECMO candidate. VA ECMO, I think world over, even the ELSO guidelines, task force has said that there is no benefit of offering VA ECMO in a surge. So I think it comes down to patient inclusion criteria, which is age less than 65 with no comorbids, less than 2 organ failure. I guess kidneys are impacted in many of these patients, and affordability has to be very clear that because there are very long runs, you're thinking of 40 days on ECMO. Equipment, machine, so you must have all the backup equipment. When you are a center which does not have CRRT or an in-house blood bank or CT scan or the space to do it, please tie up with another ECMO center before initiating so that you are later able to, shift the patient immediately, even though that center cannot reach for initiation. Safety, you must have teamwork skills and super specialists and allied who can, help you with the other parts. It's not only a one team job, which we are very much realizing. And we have to counsel the relatives about how long these runs are and what are all the bridges. And finally, definite contraindications are multi-organ failure, irreversible neurological damage, advanced age, ECPR situation, and irreversible organ damage. So,
so that was very comprehensively put. But so now
that is the transport services. Most of us.
I will come to that certain areas, but everyone is asking the very question, a pertinent question, that what is the ECMO outcome in India right at this moment? I will start with the Medica team. Dipanjan, can you give me a little bit?
The last year we had done 72 COVID ECMOs and 31 of them survived. This year we are getting a slightly difficult subset of patients. We have done 56 total number of ECMOs till date, of which we have decalculated 12. 9 of them have gone home, but 21 died. 21 died on ECMO, and 23 are still running. 23 ECMOs are still running. So the survival rate, if you have to calculate in the second phase, we'll have to wait for a few more weeks for these people who are on ECMO to come out of ECMO, or they will die.
So on an average, 40 to 45%.
On an average, it was last year it was 40%, 42%. This year it may be a little bit less. It is for us, we feel that the patients are not slow, are coming off ECMO quite slowly. We are facing much more problems this year.
Dr. Pandit, then I will come to the Chennai and Hyderabad team.
25%.
25.
That's the best.
Okay, Riyan Shetty, Bangalore.
I think I would go with 30%. 1 out of 3.
1 out of 3 is coming here. Dr. Sundar and Dr. Ramesh, sir.
Hi. Yes, in the first wave, we didn't do much of ECMOs, and I think it's about 30% survival. When I mean survival, it is discharge home, healthy, 30%. Now, currently, we have done about 15 ECMOs. We are waiting to see how they are. We are hopeful closer to about 30%. So it seems that 30% is where we are looking at. And this is all comers.
Dr. Rahulan, Dr. Vijil Rahulan, Hyderabad team.
The last surge, if you look at transplant, we did about post-COVID transplant 11, but this year we have just done 2. So, and if you look at ECMO, we have managed to decannulate about 6 of them. Right now we have about 15 ECMOs running. I would say the survival is about 30-35%.
So that is the best estimate we can get. Dr. Govil, sir, Medanta.
Look, we have done almost 25 ECMOs last year, and around 15 ECMOs, maybe 2-3 less, because Dr. Mehta's team is doing and my team is doing ECMOs. So maybe around 15, but results are very poor. Hardly 3 or 4 patients came out. We have tried every way. The longest survivor with me was around 50 days.
Dr. Poonam Malhotra, madam.
So 108 cases done the whole of last year. I'm talking COVID plus non-COVID. Of those 108, I do the anticoagulation research. COVID would be about 70 of them. We had a mortality last year, our worst. Our mortality is less than 40%. On an average, we do maximum VA ECMOs probably in the country because we do integrated ECMO. We take our LCAPAs, and I'm talking of non-COVID. We do pediatric ECMOs and we do VA ECMOs. But using VA ECMOs also in our truncus and LCAPA cases, which we were doing in plenty last year after the first surge, we saw our patients not do well. These are non-COVID patients. And the reason for that was something in the air. And then the Lancet recovery trial came saying that there is something in the air. We did not know whether our patients were doing badly for non-COVID turning COVID. That remains a mystery. But we took a call that of the 70 cases that we did of COVID, we had a mortality of 80%. We had just 20 patients surviving, and one of them survived to 108 days. And as all of you have rightly pointed out, there was something that remains in the lungs, whether it is fibrosis or the non-clearing of the whiteout, we do not know. We keep following them up. We are limited to our CT scans because of the large population we cater to. And ECMO for our center is very cheap. But we have no dearth of putting in ECMOs. But then maintaining ECMOs, since there are only 5 machines, we decided on a big no. We've just put 4 patients on ECMO in our new Burns Plasty ICU, which opened up on 1st May. Of those 4 in the second wave, 2 survived. One of them was a post-cardiomyopathy, post-cesarean. We put her prone, we put her ECMO on the 4th day, she survived. And today is her 26th day on ECMO and she's doing well. The other was an orthopedic patient post a trauma, turned COVID, and in the ward itself, put him on ECMO, he's doing wonderfully well, but we lost the other 2. So the results are 50% if you put it early, and the results, if you put it late, are 80% mortality, just 20 surviving. So that was the reason we are skeptical.
And may I ask Dr. Mule and Dr. Rahul and Dr. Sundar also that the outcome of lung transplant
Sorry to
in
interrupt,
COVID.
Dr. Shetty is quite silent. He is not.
Now, Rian told, sir, 25 to 30%.
No, I'm okay. I'm okay. Thank you.
Rian, I asked Rian about the Bangalore statistics.
Yes.
Dr. Mule, Dr. Sundar, and also Dr. Rian, you are also doing lung transplantation in COVID. The outcome of lung transplantation in COVID in India.
Who wants to take? Anvay, go ahead.
It's very bad. And that is the experience of 11 or 12 patients done last year. And this year, hardly anybody has done a COVID patients. The majority of the patients done is by KIMS and Chennai, Apollo and MGM group. And I think the results have been overall interaction bad. Now everybody is talking about right selection of the patient, and it is very difficult to comment in 1 year experience of COVID on a very 11 or 12 patients or 15 patients we are talking about of the COVID transplant patients, and telling that we have to select the patients correct. And it is very difficult to, and the selection of patient is correct or wrong is only the post-mortem decision of we come to know that, oh, I've selected it wrong or I've selected it correct. So today, again, the transplant, as I said, the donation rate has gone down so much that I told my patients on ECMO to go to Vigil, Rahulan, to KIMS, and they found that they have got a positive patient with them on ECMO on a waiting list, 4 of them ahead of her. So they decided not to go. So that is
So can I comment on our
Yes,
experience at KIMS? So last year, there were more donations. So we did 11 patients for transplant, out of which 3 died, the rest survived. This year, we have just managed to do 2 because donations have really come down, maybe 1 a month, 1 or 2 a month. So we get a lot of calls, say patients on a ventilator, they all want to come for transplant. So that is absolutely, it's not going to happen. Most of them will continue on ECMO, most of them will die. Only a very few patients will get ECMO. So we have focused this year on ECMO recovery much more than last year.
So one thing I want to say about the transplant in ECMO is, don't know what happens. Very difficult to comment. Very difficult.
So there are a lot of challenges in this patient. They are all
they're not straightforward. Surgery is okay, but for pulmonologists to handle the problem afterwards and doesn't know what is happening, especially the superadded infections.
Yes.
And COVID, what we do is that we give treatment for vitamin C deficiency, vitamin zinc deficiency. We give anti-inflammatory, we give anti-immunity, we give immune suppressant, we give immune advancing. So everything we give, masala, everything is given. There is no treatment.
All antibiotics are also exhausted.
All that effect on
So
secondary.
do the panel think? I would be asking a very bitter question on this part. Do the panel think that a lung transplant is more of a theoretical possibility for ECMO in COVID patients?
Yes.
At the moment.
I think
Yes.
so. And our experience in COVID, I would like to make a differentiation here between patients who are already on the waiting list who get a COVID and get a transplant, and people with normal lungs which are ravaged by COVID and then they get a transplant.
Yes.
So I have been in connect with the centers in the UK, and I can tell you, I spoke to them last week. Acute COVID are not even being referred for transplants. World over, probably about what have been published is over 50 to 60 cases of transplants, out of which about 20 are from India. And the results in Chennai, we have done two, but we have done two of COVID in an ILD patient. So de novo COVID, there are two who are being listed waiting for the transplant. But the results, as Anvay said, have not been so encouraging compared to a transplant you do for an end-stage lung disease of any etiology. Now, the second thing is, if there is a patient with an end-stage lung disease, either ILD, COPD, bronchiectasis, whatever, and you do a transplant, you're not dealing with a pan-systemic inflammatory syndrome even prior to the operation. Whereas in COVID, lung, although has taken a hit and has reached end stage, the disease is throughout. It is a disease, a pan-inflammatory syndrome.
But the repercussion of the treatment is throughout.
Yes, so
and
most of them, from the data I have, not published, what I've heard is most of them are bridged from ECMO. So bridge to transplant from ECMO itself is a dicey situation, and to do that in a COVID patient is that much more trickier. So there are definitely patients who will benefit from lung transplant. It is a subset, but it is a small subset, I must add, because now ECMO and lung transplant has become a household name. The minute RT-PCR is positive, everybody either wants a ECMO or a transplant. Now, I would like to spread the message that if you have to give a number out of 100 positive RT-PCR, maybe less than 1.5, one may even think about a transplant. So we should not go with the opinion that lung transplant is the answer. ECMO, mainly with a view to recovery. There is a select small subset of patients who will benefit. And given there is lockdown, there is no RTA, there is no donor. Donors should be sensibly used to people who have a high chance of recovery. I don't know. I would like
without sacrificing or neglecting a non-COVID patient who would have a better recovery chance.
I completely agree with Dr. Sundar and Dr. Anway. I think we need to be very, very clear which donation we are going to basically talk about.
The one thing clear is that for ARDS, because of infection, the lung transplant was not an indication. Except for severe pneumonia, which has destroyed whole lung, and the patient has come out of that infection with ARDS, remaining in ICU on a ventilator. That is one of the reasons for lung transplant previously. Now, this is the COVID infection, suddenly in active. So I agree with Sundar that if patient is positive, please don't go for lung transplant. Let it heal, let it cure, let the effect of COVID go. And then you can think of. See,
Arindam, even if you look at routine surgery, if you look at routine surgery, forget about transplant, just a normal heart CABG. We say that CABG may not be the right example. Let's say TKR. We say wait for 3 months for a TKR to get the COVID effects out, the inflammatory process slowly to settle down. And we are here exposing this patient to a supra major operation in an acute setting. The inflammatory effects on the other organs are going to be
both for physiological and logistic reasons, that in entire India we have done only 5 or less than 10 lung transplantation in an acute situation. I think we should be very clear to our patients that we are putting an ECMO with an prospect of getting the patient recovered from ECMO itself, right? So rather, we should not give a lung transplant, and we should say upright very clearly that there is theoretically possible, practically almost impossible to get an ECMO transplantation done. And even if you get it, the chances of recovery are not so good in that part. So I think this is very clear. Dr. Govil sir and Dr. Mishra has also joined.
Add that you can offer this option is there. That any patient should not be refused of an option. They should be very cautioned that it should be done in a center who is experienced to do it on ECMO bridged patients who are a high volume center. Your outcome may be better. So lung transplant is an option only as a last resort for patients who don't recover on ECMO, who has completely fibrous lung, and at least you have to wait about 4 weeks to get that idea, because in our case we have seen several patients who start to recover only after 3 to 4 weeks on ECMO. So if you have at least few weeks on ECMO, if there is absolutely no recovery, other complications, pneumothorax, recurrent sepsis, and still you have a single organ disease, then lung transplant may be an option in experienced centers. That's all I would say.
So I have decided not to give the lung transplant option less than 6 weeks to my patients.
Not before 6 weeks.
Not before 6 weeks.
Okay.
Has anybody seen recovery after 6 weeks?
Yes.
Because I'm getting a lot of feedback from UK and US saying that 56 days, 60 days, completely white out lungs are coming back.
I have patients.
Yeah, I think Arpan can have, and also Poonam madam also said that 108 days.
They are doing very good even after 6 weeks. Actually, the problem is happening even you put them on ECMO. The initial things were all the hypoxia correction and all this. If the run is for 6 weeks, the initial 5 weeks they take for improving the oxygenation, and the last week they take time to control their CO2 thing. So if you run a 6 weeks ECMO, you can see the first 5 weeks is for the oxygenation part to improve,
and then the carbon dioxide, the
carbon dioxide, which is
that's definitely we have done 2, 3
and
together.
They're doing good. That's what I'm telling you. The term of vanishing fibrosis is coming, because we are pretending everybody is fibrosed and it is not happening, and it's getting cleared. The CT scan is left behind with few traction bronchiectasis. That's all, nothing else.
And so what's your usage of steroids in these patients when you're having a 6 week run? When do you
reduce it? I think steroids are the worst.
I do not use steroids.
So you Swedish, yeah. So we weed off.
I had a very definite question on that. That while on being ECMO, Rahul can also, Vijil can also speak on that. That how do you improve the lung itself? So if you're not using steroids, what are your strategies to improve the lung? Because now the patient is on ECMO and lung is getting the adequate rest. How do you rejuvenate the lung itself? What is your strategy?
So we cut down steroids very fast. We are down to say 5 mg of Visalon or something like that within 1 week's time. We also use a lot of antifibrotics, anticoagulants. Obviously, you're on ECMO, and very careful fluid management strategies. You don't let the lung get overloaded, and then you just wait. You treat infections. In the longer ECMO runs, 80% work is infection control. They get these waves of infections, one after another. Infection will keep coming, but you need to.
And very difficult to detect also the infection, signs of infections and all that.
But that is how you have a successful ECMO run in after say 4 weeks, I'm telling. So once the infection is controlled, no fluid management, after 3-4 weeks, they just improve just like that. And within 1 week, they'll be, we can.
And what antifibrotics you are using, doctor?
We are using nintedanib.
So is it a single or you are combining? A lot of people are combining both nintedanib and pirfenidone.
Nintedanib alone.
Okay. And any comment from Dr. Sundar and Dr. Ramesh? Lung rejuvenation while on ECMO?
Well, I'm not sure if Ramesh is there. I mean, I pretty much agree with what they are, and to echo what Anvay said, ECMO, the popularity rose after the Caesar trial, after the H1N1 pandemic. There was so much of ARDS there. I wonder why lung transplant was not done even in a single patient with H1N1 ARDS. Now, why does coronavirus ARDS enjoy this special, priority, as I would say?
Yes,
But,
yes.
but agreeing to all what they said, agreeing to what Dr. Vijil Raghulan said, we should not close the doors to everyone. The lungs are a scarce resource, it should be used, but there are a subset of patients who, after all these things, could form an appropriate candidate. But that should
Okay,
be
very quickly, we are running short of time. I will ask Dr. Govil if he wants to ask some questions, and Dr. Mishra is also there. Any specific question?
Dr. Shetty wanted to say something.
Yes.
Gone off his screen.
No,
Dr. Dian is there.
Yes. So I support what Sundar said. We did 2 lung transplant end of last year. Both survived. They were non-COVID. Incidentally, they had COVID, which didn't affect their lung much before their transplant, and they recovered, and then they had a successful transplant. So all I want the panelists and the other guys to know that I'm not against lung transplant on COVID, but if you take an anecdotal experience from Narayana, these 2 people who survived, the lung is a very scarce resource, like Dr. Sundar said. These 2 people have now gone back to the community with successful lung transplant. If we would have transplanted those lungs on a COVID patient, I don't know what our outcomes would have been. So it's something which everybody needs to think about. Thank you.
I would just like to add one thing.
Yes, ma'am, please.
We haven't discussed, and that is when we are talking of infections and COVID, let's also talk on anticoagulation and COVID. It's a very important subject. We continue with heparin in large doses. We give a bolus. We keep continuing. And suddenly you have a patient who was eating one day and next day, he's totally lethargic in bed. You do a CT, he's got cerebral hypoxia and intracranial hemorrhage. The culprit is the heparin. You already have a patient with 1 milligram gone. You have a patient with low antithrombin 3 levels. Heparin acts through antithrombin 3, and you are not detecting antithrombin 3 levels on a general ECMO run in a COVID patient, busy with so many patients and so many other problems of other patients and also this patient. And anti-10A is a distant dream. None of us resort to a point of care like a Piptum or a Rotum. But if we don't do that and we keep losing our patients to infections and intracranial hemorrhage, which is the reason for mortality in the Indian scenario, subcontinent at least, let us think of an alternative to heparin. We've started to use bivalirudin in our non-ECMO patients. It's giving good results. But if the market opens up to the easy availability of a direct thrombin inhibitor like argatroban or eptifibatide or any group 2B3A, which we can use with judicious FDA approval and DGCI approval, we would be saving our patients on ECMO. We use heparin injudiciously. Heparin is too injudiciously used, and it's time to taper its dose just like the steroids on ECMO.
Ma'am, argatroban is available in the market in injectable form. We are using that.
No, but argatroban is very scarcely available these days, at least. We could not get it easily for Dr. Agarwal also. I remember very well.
And I think very well point taken. If there are no questions, so I would ask a last question on that the ventilation strategy on a patient on ECMO to preserve the lung. Yes, Dipanjan.
Yeah, we have been, previous ARDS experience was high PEEP, low tidal volume. And then came many patients who were having the pneumothorax after this. So we have come down on the PEEP level from 12 to 10, 8. Now we are coming down to 6 because PEEP levels, if kept high, some of them of the lungs who are totally white out bilaterally, both the lungs are pneumonic. They are having this pneumothoraxes, and these pneumothoraxes are very difficult to treat and heal. They don't heal very easily. So we have come down on the ventilation strategy, very low PEEP and low pressure control levels. Many of these patients we are seeing are having a tidal volume of around 40, 50, 60 ml. exactly like a baby lung. But if we wait for few days or weeks, and then after that, these tidal volumes goes up.
So you are saying that it is quite different from your normal ARDS that we have been trained with.
Absolutely different. Absolutely.
Because of the, and we have to have a separate day. Dr. Pandit, your experience, sir. Sir, unmute.
Sorry, I agree with what Dipanjan just said. I don't think we need to do anything different. We need to have a different subset, a different subset of patients, and we should be able to give them adequate rest. The first thing which we need to bring down is the FiO2. If we can bring down the FiO2, we all know that too much of oxygen is also not very good. And then you try and give them a bit of rest with what Dipanjan said, and wait for the recovery to happen. We just have to wait.
So it's a low tidal volume and a low PEEP strategy, rather than
not a very high PEEP. I don't know what low PEEP is, but certainly
not a high PEEP.
Yeah, you cannot
low
go for a high
tidal volume and not a high PEEP strategy. That's it. Anyone wants to add?
And a PIP not to be raised to above 18, between 15, 18. So you don't increase the respiratory rate. If you're coming down to 4 as the tidal volume per kg, then you don't increase the respiratory rate, and see the PEEP and the FiO2, as Dr. Pandit rightly said. That should come down, and the PIP should come down.
Okay, in last 5 minutes, 2 questions. Again, open questions.
Can I add something here?
Yes, please.
I think the pressures has to be monitored. So we don't keep on a volume control at all. We just do a pressure control with a PEEP of around 6 to 8, as he said. And the other thing is pneumothorax has to be dealt with fast. So we use a lot of interventional pulmonology related interventions like Spigot, glue, because these otherwise the lung won't expand and we run into risk of prolonged ECMO and stuff. And other problem is bleeding. The clots has to be removed. So we need to have quite good surveillance of these patients by bronchoscopy and treat these pneumothoraxes very quickly. Otherwise, we won't have a good outcomes.
So your intervention pulmonologists have a very definitive role there itself.
Yeah, because the pressure is very crucial.
Yes.
And the other thing is good control of blood pressure. When the patients wake up, they become, it takes about a week for them to accept awake ECMO. So in that phase, you have to control blood pressure. One of the most important reasons for intracranial bleed is uncontrolled blood pressure, patient coughing, trying to fight the vent. If that happens, invariably there is a intracranial bleed. So blood pressure control is good, is very important. Patient should be made awake, and most important also is physiotherapy, where you try to reduce the critical illness neuropathy as much as possible. You even aggressively mobilize these patients to sit up in chair. You use instruments like Motomed where they can cycle when they are lying. So you shouldn't, in my opinion, you should try to avoid paralytics. You have to do a tracheostomy, wait, manage all these complications aggressively, and then gradually the lung will recover.
Okay, so before we sign off, I would ask all the panelists to give your closing comment on this, and then I will ask Dr. Govil to, because a lot of people are asking about the training about ECMO itself, because India needs to be prepared.
Dr. Jumana, can you stop sharing your screen?
Yeah. So if I would start with Dr. Mule, sir, any closing remark?
So I think that there is a great discussion, and one thing I would like to request to Dr. Malhotra and Dr. Govil, who are in charge of, or who are the president or who are the founder of ECMO Society of India and the president of the Indian Society of Critical Care Medicine, that ECMO can be put by anybody anywhere. But as just now the panelists were talking about the management of ventilator, management of critical illness neuropathy, and physical rehabilitation of that patient, whether he recovers or for lung transplant. And very, very important in ECMO because they undergo through a severe catabolic phase. And that micromanagement of ventilator, of heparin, of this ECMO is very, very critical. And wherever you put it, please make some protocol. Very difficult in India. As Malhotra madam in the beginning only mentioned that many times the ECMO is food for finances or economics. And I understand and agree with that, entirely agree with that. But they don't know further management about it. No management. So they should be referred, even in Europe or even in UK. If the ECMO is put in Liverpool, it will be transferred to the Manchester for further micromanagement. So some sort of thing should be made.
So some sanity has to be there so that the good centers who are doing regularly, who have a huge experience, they should be, and we should be kind enough to refer our patients to a center which is equipped and experienced to that. Thank you, sir. Arpan, quickly.
2 points. ECMO in COVID is for primary recovery only, targeted for. Second thing, post ECMO follow-up of your recovery patients. Own them, be their side, help them to go for their professional comeback. They will be the torch bearer or the flag bearers of your ECMO.
So all sort of rehabilitation, physical, social, maybe a little bit of psychological, all sort of rehabilitation. Thank you. But primary, I'll take your point. ECMO for primary recovery. Sundar, sir. Sir, unmute, sir. Sir, unmute. Sir, you're muted, sir.
I am unmuted, yes.
Yeah.
Very, very quickly, as all agreed, ECMO is a multidisciplinary team approach. You need to look after infection, nutrition, physical therapy, and of course the management of ECMO. If you do this, daily rounding with an MDT team approach, either you discuss online or physically in the front, it makes a big impact in the recovery. Nowadays, we've got patients recovering even after 101 days, 101. So we need to stress on the multidisciplinary approach.
Fair enough. Dr. Rian Shetty.
Yeah, I think right candidate, early ECMO, good anticoagulation plan, and controlling infection, as one of the panelists said. And don't wait till 6 weeks, like one of the panelists says, to list him for transplant. And finally go and get yourself trained in a very good established ECMO center. We are also starting an ECMO fellowship, which has been deferred due to COVID. After COVID, we started through the ISCCM. So go train yourself and see what the experts are doing, and so that you can build your own center yourself. Thank you.
Jumana.
I think I agree with Dr. Rahulan that you need to use ECMO to reverse critical illness neuropathy. Whether the bridge is recovery or transplant, the patient should be fit to go home the day they are decannulated and off ventilator. So I think that bridge to recovery should be right from the minute you start meeting ECMO goals. So that's what my ECMO goals are.
Dr. Pandit.
I think ECMO to recovery should be that primary target. I completely agree with Arpan. ECMO to transplant is a theoretical question, like we've already discussed. And we essentially, it's a multidisciplinary approach. We have to have the dietetics, the physiotherapy, and post-ECMO rehabilitation is extremely important. Otherwise, these patients are not going to survive.
Any comment on the timing, sir? Any comment on the timing?
Timing,
with the early versus
it should be early ECMO. I am very clear. It should not be so early ECMO is not that you intubate and you intubate, you give a good go at the ventilation, prone them for a day or so. If you can oxygenate them, fine. If you can't, you think of ECMO very quickly. But not at the day 15, day 26. Third week onwards, I think it's a very poor outcome. Very poor outcome.
Poonam, madam?
I would say ethical and not compassionate or commercial use of ECMO is needed today in 2021, so that when we come to the third phase, we know where we are going. The first ECMO, we showed 70% weanability world over. Second phase ECMO would bring in results 3-4 months from now. But I'm sure there would be more dismissal in most centers than what they were for the first wave. So gearing ourselves with more experience, going ECMO and giving ECMO in experienced centers. And as Rian rightly said, learning from the masters and training the trainers is very important, something we forget. And last but not the least, don't take what was started on in 1975 or in 1953 by the giants as the mainstay in 2021. Heparin is good. It cannot be outdone. Look for alternatives. Those alternatives should be our main experiments and research today. We all need to get back to it.
I think point taken, we might have to come to a terminology of ECMO triage. once if third week comes and we are left with no choice, and an ethical and clinical indication of ECMO rather than a financial or a VIP pressure of ECMO itself. Okay, so or a family pressure, yeah, for your psychological pressure and all others. Dr. Rahulan, are you still there?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, please.
So I would say early ECMO for sure, young patients and single organ failure, and experience of the center doing ECMO is crucial, and aim for recovery. But in some patients who don't recover after 4 to 6 weeks, and if you feel the lung is unlikely to recover and is having recurrent infections and at high risk for multi-organ failure, renal failure, then you have to take a call at some point. And those patients, a very few, will be should be considered for lung transplant. That's all I
Thank you. So I would close the session. I would ask Dr. Govil to close the session with a special emphasis and note on the training that ISCCM is planning, or actually we do have a training on ECMO itself. So sir will speak about it, but I will request all the panelists to please do contribute and come up with our task force recommendation. Dr. Jumana would be coordinating with the entire thing. Dr. Jumana, I hope you would be ready to take this job itself.
Yeah, Dr. Poonam, myself, yes, of course.
Yes, yes.
It would be an honor, of course.
Yeah, thank you.
And I'm really
Sir,
privileged.
So with this note, I would like to thank all the esteemed panelists, especially Professor Poonam Malhotra, Dr. Sundar, Dr. Ramesh, Dr. Dipanjan Chatterjee, Dr. Rahul Pandit, Dr. Mule, Dr. Vijil, Dr. Arpan Chakrabarti, Dr. Riyan Shetty, and of course, our young, energetic General Secretary, Dr. Indam Kar. And side by side, I would like to thank all the delegates who attended this webinar. And I'm sure that many myths have been revealed here today, and many concepts have been clarified here in this meeting. And it will help in all the members and their patients in a long way. So again, thank you very much to all for joining this webinar and taking out your precious time. Stay safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.